We welcome Jennifer Jacobs, who's moved from the political fields of Iowa and the Des Moines Register to join the team at Bloomberg News here in Washington. Jamelle Bouie writes for Slate Magazine and is a CBS News political analyst. Dan Balls is chief correspondent for the Washington Post. And Ramesh Ponnuru is a senior editor for the National Review. Dan, I want to start with you. What's the state of play in the Democratic contest?
Well, the state of play is this, that Bernie Sanders has momentum and Hillary Clinton has mathematics. And right now, momentum is prevailing, at least in the narrative of the campaign. And so there's a lot of focus on, A, how is Sanders able to continue to, in a sense, perform better than anybody expected? I mean, he's run a remarkable campaign by any measure. And yet, the hard math of the delegates continues to be in Clinton's favor. New York is very important to her. It begins a period in which she will be able, she hopes, by the end of this month, to be able to basically say there is no way he can become the nominee, and in a sense give her a kind of a permission slip, not simply to compete for the final delegates in the nomination, but to turn her attention a bit to the general election.
To finally make that pivot.
Right.
Jennifer, I was talking to somebody this week and said, unless Bernie Sanders forces a major shift in the campaign, that there's really, even if he continues doing well, he's just not going to be able to do well enough. Is that right?
Bernie Sanders is just running out of real estate. And just the fact that, she tied him in delegates in Wyoming, even though he won, it demonstrates how rough this road is going to be for him. And she's done that repeatedly. There have been many states where they tied or he beat her, and then she got almost as many delegates, or if not more. So it's going to be a rough road for him. And it just seems like she is the presumptive nominee unless there's a major game changer.
And Jamelle, this week it got a little contentious. Bernie Sanders said she wasn't qualified. There was a lot of back and forth on that. It seemed maybe like they're both just ragged and tired from this process. But where do you get the sense of things? I mean, are there starting to be irrevocable things said in this contest? Have they stepped back from the hottest part of this race?
I mean, I think they're attempting to step back. In your interview with Senator Sanders, he sort of kind of went on the unqualified road for a little bit, but then caught himself and said, but of course, I think she would be a fine president of the United States if she were the nominee. I think it's worth noting, right, that in 2008, around this time, something like half of Clinton supporters said they wouldn't vote for Obama in the general. So even though things seem contentious and sharp right now, once we get to the convention, regardless of who the nominee, I think the Democratic Party is going to pretty quickly unify. Just sensing an ability to hold on to the White House and win quite a bit more seats in both chambers of Congress that I don't think anyone imagined was possible 6 months ago. And so that fact that winning is really on the table here in a big way, I think it's going to be the force that really pushes everyone to unify.
Mm-hmm. How happy would Reince Priebus be if the worst thing Republicans were saying about each other is that they're not qualified? I mean, we keep talking about how contentious this debate on the Democratic side is, but it's really almost comically restrained in the context of what's going on in 2016. What you have not seen from Sanders is an attack on Clinton on the basis that she's not honest and trustworthy, which is this line of attack that would potentially be fruitful because there are only a minority of Americans who believe that she's honest and trustworthy, but one that would give the Republicans something serious they could use in a general election. So far, he hasn't done that.
Yeah, that's right. Dan, do you think it would, in terms of Bernie Sanders, did he sort of step by talking about qualifications? He's had a good run. Did he give a gift to the Clinton campaign by talking about that? It seemed to get him off track this week.
Well, I do. I think it hurt him in this way. He had a big victory in Wisconsin. He headed into a 2-week period ahead of the New York primary with some wind at his back, and yet all of a sudden he got caught up in a debate that did him no favors. And I think that a lot of Democrats believe that he lost that week, a week that he needed to keep the momentum going. So I think it was a misstep on his part. In a sense, he kind of took the bait from the Clinton campaign and escalated beyond what it needed to be. And I was struck again in the interview that he did with you that he can't quite let go of it. He knows he ought to. They seemed to pivot out of it late last week, and yet again today he's kind of repeating some of the same lines. So I don't think it was helpful, and he's got to kind of regain the momentum that he had a week ago.
Jennifer, does it matter that that Bernie Sanders had a bad interview on the specifics with the New York Daily News to his voters?
Yeah, I think it did. Actually, one Democrat pointed out to me that it seems like Bernie Sanders is earning more Pinocchios from the Washington Post fact checkers these days than he's earning delegates. And the thing about, she said, quote unquote, that I'm, unqualified was one of the things where he was fact checked as false. And there have been several other things.
She didn't actually say that.
She did not actually say he is not qualified. And there have been other things that, he has been fact checked on lately that, are permeating into that, into the consciousness, and people are realizing that he doesn't always get his facts exactly right.
I'm a conservative, but I want to defend the socialist here. And I think there have been a lot of cheap shots about that Daily News interview. When Senator Sanders says we're going to put a cap on the size of the banks and it'll be up to them to figure out how they meet that cap, that's a totally legitimate answer. That's the way a cap on bank size would work. And it's just silly for people to say, oh, well, why isn't he actually spelling out in detail what they're going to have to do?
Right. I'm gonna agree there. Like, if you reading that interview, Sanders has a clear idea of the kinds of policies he would want to pursue. He knows that laws like Dodd-Frank give the White House quite a bit of authority in determining how to pursue bank regulation. The fact that he can't give you chapter and verse, I think, is less important than the fact that he does have a broad sense of what his administration would do to approach these questions.
And what he's got that has been effective is he has a diagnosis of what he thinks the problems in the country are, and the basis from which that occurs, and a set of policies that are designed out of that diagnosis. She has a different one. She has a series of answers for specific problems, but that's a different thing than the theory of the case. And I think it's one of the reasons his message has been more succinct and therefore probably more effective than hers. What she's got is, everything that the Clintons bring to the table.
His campaign is on fire. If he had been this strong before the Iowa caucuses that early on, he would be the nominee now.
But there's another aspect to this, which is what nobody quite likes to talk about, and that's the superdelegates. I mean, we know she has a big lead in superdelegates. They have more superdelegates than they have announced. I mean, they have in the neighborhood of 600 superdelegates pledged to them, many of whom are not prepared to publicly say that yet. If he doesn't have a majority of pledged delegates, there's no way those superdelegates are going to switch.
Are going to switch over, which is his theory. Okay, let's hold it there. We'll get back to the Republicans, but for right now, we're going to just take a little break. Stay with us. We're back now with our panel. Jennifer, where do things stand on the Republican side of the race?
Well, Ted Cruz is getting a reputation for outfoxing Donald Trump in that hand-to-hand delegate combat. So yesterday in Colorado, he swept up all of the available delegates there, now has 34 from Colorado. Iowa did the same thing. His people managed to squeeze themselves into all but one delegate slot in Iowa. And so he really is just running circles around Donald Trump in this particular case. Now, obviously, this won't matter if Trump gets to the necessary number before the convention, and they know that they're going to have trouble in a few of the upcoming contests. They know that Nebraska, South Dakota, Montana, possibly Washington State and Oregon are going to be trouble for them, but they
Trouble for Trump.
Trouble for Trump.
Right.
Yes, sorry. But the Trump people do think that they're going to do well in almost all the other states, and that includes California and Indiana. And if they do, all of this delegate wrangling that that Ted Cruz is doing won't matter as much. Now, Trump is complaining that he thinks that this process is tilted. It seems like he's been more focused on the states that he's winning than how you actually technically win. But he is listening to the fact that he needs to do more. I have heard he is sending a crew down to the RNC's, the Republican National Committee's spring meeting in Florida in 10 days, and their whole mission is to meet the RNC members from the various states, really work on building relationships and sending the message that they really want to work with the party officials.
Ramesh, I want to ask you, Donald Trump has been tweeting on this question of fairness. He wrote a tweet that said, "Isn't it a shame that the person who will have by far the most delegates and many millions more votes than anyone else, me, still must fight?" He's making this case on fairness grounds. Forget the math, forget 1,237. He's just got more. Shouldn't it go to him? How potent do you think that argument is?
Well, look, if he gets a majority of the vote and a majority of the delegates, he is going to be the nominee. And I don't think that the concept of majority rule is all that difficult or arcane for people to understand.
What if he just gets the plurality, though? He doesn't have the majority. It's an open convention. He's trying to say even that, since he'll have most of the delegates, that'd be unfair if he didn't get it.
He can try to make that argument, and maybe it'll sway some of the delegates, but I suspect it won't. I think he's got to do three things. One, get as many bound delegates as he can through the voting. Second, actually compete in this delegate selection process, where so far Senator Cruz's people have been the only people showing up to the interview in a suit and a tie. And then third, he's got to actually organize an effort to sway supporters of other candidates on a second ballot, which you've heard almost nothing from the Trump campaign. Those are three very difficult things to do. If they had been trying to organize 2 months ago along those lines, they'd probably have this nomination wrapped up, but they are getting to it very late.
Dan, you go ahead.
I think Ramesh is right that Trump's, I have the most argument may not sway actual delegates, but I wouldn't ignore the extent to which actual regular voters may find the entire process unfair if the person who won the most of everything, but not quite the technical majority, didn't get the nomination. Just because the expectation voters have when going to these polls is not that some arcane process will determine the nominee, but the guy who won will determine the nominee. And so that I wouldn't put aside, because that's potentially very important.
John, I sat down Friday evening in New York with Paul Manafort, who has been tasked by Donald Trump to be the convention manager and, in a sense, to be in charge of now the whole process of accumulating the delegates. They're clearly in the middle of a transition in that campaign. They have been, as Jennifer said, they have been outfoxed, circled, outrun by the Cruz campaign in all of these organizing things. I think the challenge ahead for them is, can they now get their act together in this kind of hand-to-hand combat? But Manafort said, and he's laid down a marker, that they will be able to accumulate enough delegates so that it is clear he is going to be the nominee before Cleveland. And he said by mid-May, I hope we are, in a sense, the presumptive nominee. So they have set a very high bar for themselves, given the difficulty that they've been having.
I wondered about that word presumptive nominee. I mean, so I can claim I'm the presumptive nominee even if I haven't gotten the majority of delegates, by this standard that if you just have the most delegates of everybody, that makes you presumptive, right?
Well, I think it goes beyond that. I think that's part of it, but I think it is a recognition on the part of the party that he is inevitable at this point. Now, he thought they should have treated him better back in March when he was on a winning streak. That didn't happen for all the reasons we know about the questions about his qualification and his knowledge and whether he would take the party to a big loss. But they are hoping that if they can have a big night in New York and other states as we go forward, that the party establishment, in the ways that Jennifer again was talking about, of kind of build those bridges, that people begin to coalesce.
What do you make, Jennifer, of Trump's tone change a little bit, moving towards being presidential? Is that happening?
Right. So a month ago, he tried to do that, and then everything fell apart. And so a month ago, everyone was saying, okay, we think he is going to be inevitable, so we all need to live in that Trump world, and let's learn to accept it and work with him. And then that just disappeared. But, people are starting to advise him, start off at square one again. Go back to your original policy ideas where you're talking about, the wall, national security, health care, cleaning up Washington, D.C. Other people are saying, quit the Twitter addiction. Just stop now. If you're not going to do it when you're president, just quit tweeting now. And then really focus on the scoreboard and start racking up those delegates. But one thing about Cruz, he doesn't get enough credit for this with all this delegate wrangling, is it shows what a great micro organizer his team is, and his strategy to say that, that shows that he could be a really great general election candidate because he really knows how to organize and excite.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you. Coming up next, PBS filmmaker Ken Burns previews his latest project, Jackie Robinson. We're back with filmmaker Ken Burns, whose latest work is Jackie Robinson, which airs Monday and Tuesday nights on PBS. Simple starter question, why Jackie Robinson?
He's the most important person in the history of baseball. He may not be the best player, but he's the most important because he was this pioneer, finally making the game what it had always claimed to be, the national pastime, by being the first African American in the modern age to cross the color line. You know, we don't focus too much. We say he'd crossed the color line, but we don't talk about it. And we felt it was important to tell a story. The we is my daughter Sarah Burns and the filmmaker David McMahon, who we've been working for several years on this deep dive, and not just the narrow story of what we're familiar with, that 1947 turning the other cheek Christ-like thing, but the whole story from the birth in 1919 to his death in 72.
If I had a room jammed with trophies, awards, and citations, and a child of mine came into that room and asked what I had done in defense of black people and decent whites fighting for freedom, and if I had to tell that child I had kept quiet, that I had been timid, I would have to mark myself a total failure in the whole business of living. Jackie Robinson.
Tell us about where America was during this period to set the stage for him.
Well, it's roiling about race in ways that we are right now, and I think what's so interesting about the story of Jackie Robinson is it resonates with today in so many ways, from Confederate flags to driving while black to stop and frisk to all the things that we think are the modern stuff we're dealing with regard to race. There was, after World War II, a real push, and there had been for many years in the black press and in the leftist press, to sort of integrate baseball. This was the great symbol of America, the national pastime, and why didn't we live out the true meaning of our creed and bring someone up? And through a whole set of very interesting accidents, Jackie became that person. And when you realize when he came up on April 15th, 1947, Martin Luther King was a junior at Morehouse College. Truman hadn't integrated the military. There'd been no Brown versus Board of Education. Rosa Parks hadn't thought of not giving up her seat, though Jackie had done it 3 years earlier in a military base in Texas, Fort Hood. He's really, as King himself said, a sit-inner before sit-ins, a freedom rider before freedom rides.
Yeah, and what was their reaction?
Well, you know, it was in one area a sense of, wow, we could kind of reference our better angels. But of course, the baser instincts, which we notice all around us even today, had their full say. So were there death threats and black cats put on the field and the most, withering racist stuff directed at him. And he found himself besieged at every corner. I mean, one of the amazing things is, if he hadn't been married to this extraordinary woman, Rachel Robinson, who's still with us, I'm not sure that Jackie could have made it.
I want to get to that in a second, but first I want to play a clip here.
Pitchers threw at his head. More than once, runners sprinting towards first base spiked Robinson with their cleats. And a hard slide by Robinson would not go unnoticed by opposing infielders. Away from the field, Jackie spent little time with his teammates. On the road, he still had to stay at Jim Crow hotels and took his meals alone. Jimmy Cannon, writing in the New York Post, called Jackie the loneliest man I've ever seen in sports.
The loneliest man in sport. Talk about that loneliness.
When this man passed away at age 53, he looks old and stooped like he's a white-haired, retired Pullman car porter. It was from the load he carried. I'm 62, he was 53. You know, he carried something for so many of us, and not just African Americans, but as he used to say, decent whites, people who were concerned with advancing the progress of America. And that's why the story is so important. And the fact that a lot of us talk the talk, he actually walked the walk. He got up every day and he went out to try to make lives better for everyone else. And that was an amazing accomplishment.
What did carrying all that weight, what kind of character did it require, and what did it do?
We think of him as the guy who just Christ-like turned the other cheek, but in fact, he was angry and competitive and impatient with being told, as African Americans had for decades, just wait, be patient, be patient, be patient, it'll all come. And it wasn't coming, and he was pushing and pushing and pushing. So the turning of the other cheek makes it more interesting, and I think our film is attempting to say there's a much more complicated person person than the mythology. And by the way, that complicated person is even more mythological in its status. And I think that has its cost. I mean, to have put up with that day after day after day is an incredible burden to bear.
When Branch Rickey, the Dodgers club president, brought him on, signed him, his advice was get married.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, he knew that he'd need somebody, as we all do, to get through the dark nights of the soul that were inevitably going to come. And, you know, and Robinson sort of swallowed hard and said, I'm willing to do this if you're willing to take a chance on me. But he said, Mary, and he fortunately had been seeing and was engaged to this remarkable woman, Rachel Robinson.
Talk about her a little bit, her strength.
I don't think you could have had Jackie Robinson without Rachel. She was able to provide a kind of safe haven for him, to go out to the ballpark and could see what was happening, and then they didn't have to bring it home. There wasn't a kind of rot that developed there. This film, if anything, is this love story. It's a multi-generational portrait of an African-American family, which you don't often get, set across an extraordinary set of decades of change in the United States, in our national pastime, in our politics, and in race. But it's also an intimate story of two people negotiating very, very complicated shoals and eddies in the course of his professional life.
You talked to President Obama and the First Lady, so let's take a look at that clip.
Just being able to find that solace and that peace to withstand all the negative energy, you know, it's hard to do that alone. So there's nothing more important than family, than a real partnership, which is probably what made him such a great man, because he had the judgment to find a partner that, well, I think it's true. I mean, I think that's a sign of his character, that he chose a woman that was his equal. I don't think you would have had Jackie Robinson without Rachel.
So there's your point about Rachel Robinson, but the First Lady and the President don't show up in a lot of documentaries.
No, they were very generous with their time, but I think what was so clear, maybe to them as well as to us, is that here you have four people, two couples, Jackie and Rachel and the President and the First Lady, sort of hurtling through different times and spaces, and yet for a moment there, they're united. And for a second, Jackie and Rachel and the President and the First Lady sort of merge, and they also seem utterly human.
A couple of questions about the process here. What was it like having Jackie Robinson in your head?
I find it incredibly moving. He was a doer and not a sayer, and I think I spend way too much of my time talking and not doing, and he makes me want to make the world better, not just make it better for my own little niche, but make it better for others, and that is exactly what he wants. You know, at the very end of the film, it's a little bit of a downer. He's not sure he's had it made, actually, in fact. But then you think that every April 15th, every single ball player puts on his uniform in every stadium in the major leagues, that it's the only number retired in every stadium. He appeals to the best in us, and that's what makes it just not only a great story in sports, but a great story in American history, and in some ways, a great human story.
Ken Burns, thanks very much. And we'll be right back in a moment. That's it for us today. Thanks for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm John Dickerson.